At 9:30 this morning, global OSINT communities lit up. A new set of commercial satellite images appeared online, revealing why the USS Abraham Lincoln had suddenly moved to a heightened state of readiness. The event itself had unfolded quietly 10 days earlier in the Indian Ocean, and for a brief moment, it pushed the region dangerously close to a much larger confrontation. It happened at 4:15 on January 20th, off the coast near the Gulf of Oman. A container ship sailing under the Marshall Islands flag was broadcasting fake Singapore AIS signals while moving silently toward the Strait of Hormuz. Hidden inside cargo hold number 4 were 20 tons of next-generation titanium carbon gyroscopes, a critical shipment meant to help Iran restart its ballistic missile production line after last year's Natanz incident. High above, an American MQ-4C Triton reconnaissance drone had already locked onto the vessel. Then, without warning, its control screen turned completely white. Iran had activated a powerful portable electronic warfare system supplied by Russia, hoping to blind American surveillance long enough for the ship to slip into disputed waters. But they had miscalculated. Out of the darkness ahead, the destroyer USS Spruance suddenly broke radio silence and blocked the ship's path. A demand to stop echoed across the water, but it was quickly followed by heavy warning fire striking the sea beside the bow. Under intense pressure, the Iranian captain was forced to turn sharply and slow the vessel down to avoid the bridge being hit. That moment of confusion was exactly what the Americans had been waiting for. While the crew's attention stayed fixed on the destroyer, 2 stealth RHIB boats carrying SEAL Team 6 operators moved in from the shadows. Grappling hooks flew over the rail, and within just 27 seconds, the team was on deck. They believed the infiltration had gone perfectly. But when the lead operator reached the lock on cargo hold number 4, no one realized that behind that steel door was not just silent cargo. Something else was waiting inside. At 04:22, the SEAL team began cutting through the lock with a thermal lance. The 4,000-degree flames sliced through the thick metal with ease. The hatch cracked open, and immediately the point man's thermal imager began flashing red. The hold was not empty. On the sensor screen, 8 figures were moving into ambush positions. They were not ordinary crew members. They wore tactical gear, carried suppressed close-range firearms, and 2 of them had portable air defense systems. This was a Quds Force Special Operations Unit, some of the most highly trained personnel in Iran's Revolutionary Guard, placed there to protect the shipment at all costs. They were concealed behind the cargo with their sights aimed directly at the hatch. A standard entry would have put the SEALs at a severe disadvantage before they even touched the floor. But the SEAL commander adapted instantly. He ordered 2 flash devices to be sent through the narrow ventilation shaft beside the hatch. The blast echoed through the sealed compartment, creating a wave of pressure that shook the deck above. For 4 critical seconds, the 8 Quds Force fighters were completely disoriented. The SEALs used every fraction of that opening. 4 operators fast-roped into the hold and moved with precise close-quarters tactics. In just 17 seconds, all 8 hostile fighters were brought under control. 2 who attempted to trigger hidden devices were stopped immediately. The remaining 6 were restrained with zip ties. At this point, if you respect the skill and discipline of the U.S. Navy SEALs, write yes in the comments below. But the real surprise came moments later. When the team opened the container, they froze. It was empty. A chill ran through the entire operation. Iran had outplayed them. The shipment had never been inside the visible container at all. The crew had cut into the ship's floor, concealed all 20 tons of components beneath a false deck, welded an 8-centimeter steel plate over the compartment, and painted it so perfectly that it blended into the ship's structure without a trace. The empty container above had been nothing more than a decoy. In an instant, the mission shifted from a clean seizure to a far more dangerous engineering problem. Cutting through 8 centimeters of load-bearing steel with a thermal tool would take at least 8 minutes. Inside that sealed, overheated space, those 8 minutes could become impossible. The rising temperature would drain the air, increase pressure, and turn even the smallest flammable material nearby into a serious threat to the entire team. Everything was now balanced on a razor's edge. Up on the surface, the situation was spiraling just as fast. The Iranian captain decided to take the biggest gamble of the night. Instead of following the USS Spruance's order to stop, he pushed the engines to full power. The 50,000-ton container ship trembled as thick black smoke poured from its stack. Then it surged forward at 25 knots, weaving in a wild zigzag pattern and cutting across the American destroyer's bow at a dangerously close distance of only 300 meters. The USS Spruance had no choice but to turn hard to avoid a collision, and that was only the opening move. The moment the American warship was forced to adjust course, 12 fast attack boats rushed out from behind nearby civilian fishing vessels and headed straight toward the U.S. formation. They released flares and clouds of radar-reflective material, filling the area with confusion and causing the ship's radar picture to flicker and blur. The close-in defense system spun into readiness, but the American crew could not safely respond. The Iranian boats had placed themselves too close to civilian fishing vessels, creating a chaotic moving screen that made it almost impossible for the automatic system to clearly separate threats from innocent ships. Using that hesitation, the fast boats formed a tight protective ring around the cargo vessel, cutting off the SEAL team trapped inside. The operators were now sealed inside a runaway steel giant, while outside a swarm of fast boats guarded it from every side. The steel deck still required too much time to cut through, and worse, a new danger was appearing on the horizon. At 0435, at the coastal weapons site on Qeshm Island, Iran made its next move. 4 C-802 anti-ship launch systems were raised, and 8 Shahed 136 one-way drones were sent toward the U.S. fleet. Inside the cargo hold, the SEALs could hear the unmistakable high-pitched engine sound of drones passing low near the ship's hull. The team immediately understood the truth. The 8 minutes needed to cut through the steel deck and collect physical evidence were now time they simply did not have. The team leader clenched his jaw and gave the order. Switch to Plan B. Activate the EMP device. It was an extremely risky choice. The electromagnetic pulse and malware package was a last resort option, more focused on disabling the hidden cargo than recovering it intact. There was no guarantee it would succeed, and for the EMP to work, the team first had to locate the ship's lifeline, the data cables and power system running beneath the floor. After a frantic search, the technical specialist shouted that he had found the access point. It was inside a service conduit beneath the engine section. He dropped to the oily deck and crawled into a cramped dock compartment. There was no clean access port, no simple plug-in point, no easy solution. In front of him was a thick steel conduit. He had to cut through the outer shell with a compact handsaw, working in a space so tight he could barely move his fingers. Then the entire ship lurched. The Iranian captain had realized he was being followed. Knowing support from the coast was already in motion, he made a sudden 90-degree turn and drove the ship towards Sri Lankan territorial waters. His calculation was clear. If the Americans took direct action inside those waters, Washington could be dragged into a major diplomatic crisis. The sharp maneuver tilted the vessel 18 degrees. The SEALs were thrown off balance, and the technical specialist was left half-trapped inside the engine compartment, with only seconds to finish a task that had suddenly become almost impossible. A heavy reserve engine block suddenly broke loose and slid past the technician, missing his legs by only a fraction. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the pressure of working on a live cable tap while the entire deck bucked under him. One tiny mistake could short the system, damage the device, or put the whole team in immediate danger. Outside, the USS Spruance was forced into emergency evasive maneuvers as an incoming anti-ship threat tried to lock on. With the destroyer focused on survival, it could no longer provide direct support to the SEAL team. The mission was reaching its breaking point. Would they finish before the cargo ship crossed the red line? Then, at the most critical moment, an EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft from the USS Abraham Lincoln arrived overhead. The pilot activated the ALQ-99 jamming system and focused it directly on Iran's command frequencies. In seconds, the cargo ship's captain was cut off from shore control. He could no longer receive instructions, updates, or coordination signals from land-based command. But the danger was far from over. On Qeshm Island, an air defense system detected the Growler and locked onto its radar signature. Instead of pulling away, the Growler released 4 high-speed MALD-J decoys. The decoys raced forward at Mach 1.5, copying the radar profile of an incoming F/A-18 strike group. The trick worked. The island's defense batteries shifted their attention to the false targets, wasting precious time on shadows in the sky. Back inside the tilted cargo hold, the SEAL team finally managed to connect the USB device carrying the malware package. But just as the system began to run, their worst fear became reality. The Iranian captain had lost contact with the guard team below. Realizing the ship had likely been boarded, he grabbed a weapon and led 6 remaining sailors toward the cargo hold. A moment later, they kicked open the main door. Bright flashlights swept through the darkness. Then the beam stopped directly on the SEAL team gathered around the EMP unit. The element of surprise was gone. It was 4 against 6 in a cramped 4x4 meter space, with a slick deck underfoot and the entire ship still shaking beneath them. At the same time, the warning came through from the USS Spruance. An incoming anti-ship projectile had been launched with impact estimated in 90 seconds. Iran had chosen to fire on the last known coordinates, even at the risk of losing its own vessel, just to stop the operation. The SEALs were pinned in the corner as the sailors raised their weapons. But while the Iranian crew reacted in panic, the SEALs stayed completely focused. Before the opposing side could settle their aim, the two lead operators dropped low and responded with suppressed sidearms equipped with infrared aiming systems. The first two attackers were taken out of the fight almost instantly. The remaining four froze for a split second, surprised by the speed and precision of the response. The captain tried to reach for a handheld explosive device, but a round struck his shoulder, causing it to fall from his hand before it could be armed. One SEAL rushed forward, kicked it away, and secured him immediately. The entire exchange lasted only 27 seconds. The deck was covered with spent casings, and the air was thick with smoke and alarm tones. But there was no time to process what had just happened. In the team's headset, the command center shouted the warning again. Incoming threat, 60 seconds to impact. There was no safe path back through the ship. The SEAL team leader made the call. He activated a linear cutting charge placed on the side scupper hatch of the cargo hold. A deep blast echoed through the vessel, and the heavy steel panel was blown out toward the sea, opening a wide exit as wind and seawater rushed inside. Jump! Now! One by one, the operators clipped their safety harnesses and launched themselves through the opening. Cargo ship was still moving at 25 knots as they dropped 15 meters into the black water below. A stealth RHIB boat surged through the darkness, racing alongside the moving ship to recover them. Each operator hit the water hard, rolling through the waves before being pulled aboard under almost impossible conditions. The last SEAL had barely been extracted when the RHIB broke away from the shadow of the cargo vessel. At that same moment, aboard the USS Spruance, the captain ordered the launch of a Nulka active decoy. The device shot into the air, broadcasting a powerful electronic signature designed to draw the incoming threat away from the ship. The Iranian missile suddenly shifted away from its original path, locked onto the decoy's signal, and detonated roughly 400 meters from the American ship. The impact sent a violent shockwave across the water, shaking the sea around them. But the U.S. fleet remained intact, and the SEAL team had made it out. On January 21st, the cargo ship arrived at Bandar Abbas, where Iranian officials quietly believed the mission had succeeded. But their confidence disappeared the moment missile specialists connected the hidden components to a diagnostic system. The screen turned green. Then one message appeared: fatal error, firmware corrupted. The SEAL team's combined cyber and electromagnetic operation had worked exactly as intended. The shipment was no longer usable. And for Iran, the situation was even more painful because there was no clear evidence they could publicly use against the United States. At the same time, they could not openly discuss the losses suffered by the Quds personnel on board without admitting that a protected military unit had been placed on a vessel tied to a restricted shipment. That silence created the perfect opening for the Pentagon's next move. The leak on OSINT forums, appearing just as the USS Abraham Lincoln entered the region, was not random. It was a message. We see everything, and we can reach you whenever we choose. Iran responded immediately. Its Fateh and Ghadir submarine forces left their bases, while allied armed groups across the region announced that they were prepared for a wider confrontation. Now the Gulf stands at the edge of a much larger crisis, and it all began with that 27-second raid aboard a ghost ship in the middle of the night. Will Tehran absorb the humiliation, or will it answer with a move against American positions in the next 24 hours? The answer may come sooner than anyone expects.